With the Four Nations break here, we've already heard insiders like Elliotte Friedman say that there's going to be a lot of trade activity during the next couple weeks. And one of the recent names to be added to the trade block is Jared McCann of the Seattle Kraken, a really underrated one, and to me a player that's going to get a lot of interest throughout the NHL. So what's happening with Jared McCann? Why is he available from Seattle? How good can he be? And which teams do I see as the most likely to trade for him? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the trade options and all the trade rumors, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this, presented by BetUS. Now, actually getting the confirmation here that Jared McCann is available, we have to go to Jacob Stroller of Sportsnet, who says this: I'm hearing Jared McCann could be made available before the deadline. McCann is a versatile scoring forward that can kill penalties and play center if needed. The 28-year-old carries a $5 million AAV until the end of the 2027 season. Now, this really isn't the biggest surprise in the world. When you look at that Seattle Kraken forward group, what forward hasn't been a part of trade rumors? Really, right, Kako and Beniers, but you look at Jared McCann now, Brandon Tanev, Burakovsky, Bjorkstrand, Yanni Gord, pretty much half of that forward group has already been out there in the market. But I think McCann was definitely the most surprising to see, considering I think he's a part of the solution rather than the problem for Seattle. The lack of scoring, especially for the last two seasons, has really haunted them, but especially in McCann's case, you could make the argument that the goal scoring hasn't quite been there. Of course, as a 28-year-old 6'1" forward, he's been all over the place in his career, going from a disappointment with Florida and rebounding in a big way with teams like Pittsburgh, and then going on to Seattle, where he's had a very successful career. You can see starting out with 50 points in 74 games in his first season, and then in his second year, he got 40 goals and 70 points in 79 games. But I think you can start to notice a trend here when it comes to McCann and what he's been for Seattle, because you can look at the first two seasons when he was with the Kraken, and he had more goals and assists pretty consistently. 27 goals, 23 assists, 40 goals, 30 assists. In the last two seasons, though, we've seen the finishing kind of fall off a little bit, but the playmaking becoming more of an attribute for him. 29 goals and then 33 assists last year, and then this season being on pace for 20 goals and 40 assists. So a pretty big difference in the player he's become. Now, for me personally, I think he's much more of a 30 goal scorer than a 20 goal scorer for the long term. He's somebody that I think has been snake bitten in quite a few ways, especially this season in terms of the goal scoring consistency. The finishing just hasn't been where you've expected it to be, but I also think we're underestimating just how much the Seattle system has been a part of these issues. The past couple of years, everybody seems to have fallen off, especially since that 2023 season. In McCann's case, he's right up there, but he really hasn't had this elite first line center to really work with throughout his entire time with the Kraken. And I think going to a new team with a much more balanced roster that's a much more competitive team as well will help McCann in the end. Now, one of the most interesting things about McCann, and one of the reasons why I want to make today's video, was because of his contract. And I know that might be a silly thing to say, but it's honestly one of the best in the league, and honestly one of the best on the Kraken. You look at what he's making, and in terms of how he has been playing, he's a 60, 70 point producer almost every single season, and he's making just $5 million, not just for this year, but for the next 2 seasons after this. So not only are you getting great value now, you're getting great value for another 2 seasons afterwards. So it's nowhere near a rental. This is a long-term fit for any team who trades for him. Now, looking at his contract and the details there, I think a reason why that cap hit is so low is because he does have some trade protection, a 10-team no trade list, so you do have to factor that in. I don't think Winnipeg would end up being a fit, unfortunately. Buffalo as well, I think you could knock off the list. But the thing that I find interesting is that I don't really see it limiting too many options, because I think contenders are going to be in on McCann. I think teams looking to take the next step next year especially are going to be in McCann because of that term and because of that consistency. Even with the goal scoring falling off a little bit, teams are going to be all over him, in my opinion, and why not? He's been such a productive player for Seattle. McCann seems like the perfect buy low candidate, somebody that just has not been able to finish this season, but I could easily see in a new situation, a new opportunity, going right back to the old McCann we know and love. And heck, he's still on pace for 60 points this year with all of those concerns about the goal scoring, so he's going to get a lot of value out there. Now we're going to move on to our sweepstakes segment where we get into the teams that I think could be involved in McCann in a second, but let's first talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, the place to make your hockey picks all throughout this season, and especially with the Four Nations face-off starting here, there are so many opportunities to win big. Just going through the teams that could potentially win it, we got Canada and the US with the same odds at plus 150, but you also go for the other options. You can go through the round robin points for each team, as well as the face-off MVP. McDavid with the best odds at plus 650, Nathan McKinnon at plus 1,000, and then Matthews at 1,200. Some very interesting odds out there. And if you guys want to make your picks, just use code YouTube150 and you'll get an 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% sign-up bonus on your next 2 deposits right after that. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on was Jared McCann's position, because Elite Prospects ranks him as a center as well as a winger, and I think a lot of other outlets have him still as a centerman. He's not that anymore. He is a left wing. He has played left wing all throughout this season for Seattle. There is a component that he could play centerman if he needs to, but I think most likely any team that trades for him will have him on that left wing. So consider that when it comes to potential mock trades. Now, in terms of the value out there for McCann, a trade that I could see pretty easily happening is a younger forward that could really replace McCann on that third line immediately, as well as a first-round pick. I think that's pretty likely considering McCann's low cap hit, his AAV, and also the term on his contract. I think McCann's pretty locked up. He's pretty consistent. You know what you're getting, and for a team out there that's a contender, I think that upgrade could be well worth it. For the Kraken, getting younger, I think is going to be their main focus in this deadline, especially with so many different forwards they could end up dealing. In McCann's case, he's not really that old, but I think as Seattle kind of retools here, they're going to go for a younger presence. One team that came to mind immediately is the Carolina Hurricanes, and it might be a little bit silly to also go after Jared McCann, but it would be just insane to see, especially that left side being Rantanen, McCann, Svechnikov, and Hall. That would be absolutely ridiculous, but for Carolina, I think they could use a player for a term. I think that's something that they've always kind of gone for. They don't really much of a rental team besides Jay Gensel. Having the term that McCann has could be interesting there, as well as the goal scoring upside. Again, I think he's still more of a playmaker long term, but the goal scoring I think will rise. I think that's something that Carolina can always use, and even though I think they will more likely go for a centerman, I think still adding a McCann could be pretty brilliant, and maybe he does play center there for the Canes. This is just my wacky idea though to start things out, but I think there is potential to it. One team I wanted to mention here is the Detroit Red Wings. They're a team that I think is fascinating when it comes to this deadline, as a team that's trying to make the playoffs, is right there on the cusp of things, trying to solidify themselves. I think a player like McCann could really bring some speed and agility they don't have a lot of in that forward group, and you look at that left side, and I think having Kasper, DeBrincat, and McCann there could really elevate things. I do like Elmer Soderblom quite a bit, but McCann is a pretty obvious upgrade. I feel like the most likely player that would go back is a player like Jonathan Berggren, though I could see Seattle really wanting a player like Marco Kasper, though I doubt Detroit ends up giving up on it. What I could see the deal looking like is surrounding Jonathan Berggren as the main player going back with a first-round pick that's potentially lottery protected. That I think is what Detroit would want to have happen there. If that does happen, I could see maybe another pick on top of that as well, a second or a third-round pick potentially, and I think that could be similar to what we see actually happen. One team I want to give a shout to is the Edmonton Oilers, who as of right now have $5.2 million to work with, and especially if they're sending back a player to Seattle, they could easily make the cap space work here. I could really see an addition though to that left side, which is pretty brutal at this point. Arvidsson's been fine, Skinner has been pretty meh, but I think they could really use a solidified top 6 upgrade there. McCann checks those boxes, especially with the speed and agility. He would have no problem matching up to the intensity that McDavid and Draisaitl bring. I think the player that is kind of up that Berggren echelon is Vasily Podkolzin, who's had a pretty solid year of Edmonton so far, though he's a lot more of a physicality-based forward, which isn't really something that Seattle usually goes for, but maybe they change their minds in that case, and Podkolzin is the player back, but I would easily see a first rounder and another prospect being on top of that deal to make things work. One team that I could see potentially going for an upgrade on the wings for that long term, as well as having players on the other side that I think could match what Seattle's looking for. The Islanders, I think, could be a pretty interesting fit. Now, on the left side, you already have Sipakov there, who's pretty solid. Leah's actually been pretty solid this year as well. But McCann, I think, could easily be on that first line and bump those guys down. The big player that I think Seattle would want is Simon Holmstrom, who's honestly having one of the most underrated seasons in the NHL this year. He is on pace for 47 points, has 30 points already this season. He's been great for that Islanders offense, and is finally starting to become that first round pick hype type of player that we saw him potentially be. And he's somebody that I don't know if the Islanders are willing to give up, but if I'm looking for a player that could easily be on that middle 6 and have results doing so, Holmstrom could be a pretty obvious fit. He could be on that left side as well as a left shot as well. And I think the Islanders too, of what they are still trying to go for, still trying to compete in the future, McCann could really give them that boost. We'll see though if Holmstrom is the guy they're willing to give up though, because I think for Seattle, that might be the holdup if they don't want to give him up. I could see McCann going elsewhere. Now we go on to another team in the Big Apple that I could see having a player that Seattle wants that could potentially be the make or break of a deal in the New York Rangers, because I think the Rangers could be interesting here as having potentially a McCann as a second line left wing behind Panarin. It could really give them a boost to their speed and their generation of 5-on-5, which is something the Rangers have always struggled with. And I think McCann could be part of the solution there for the Rangers as well. The big thing though that I would see the Kraken wanting is Will Cooley. We already saw the Kraken going after another young winger on the Rangers in Kakko and turning him into greatness already. Cooley has been solid for the Rangers in a lot of key areas this year in terms of the intensity, the passion out there, especially when things have gotten rough. He's been still out there giving 110%. He, to me, could be a really interesting ad for the Kraken, though, considering how solid he's been, I doubt the Rangers want to give him up. That's a situation, though, where the Rangers want to continue to improve, continue to compete. That could be a situation where they might have to give up Cooley to make it happen, but I think they'd probably look elsewhere and probably to cheaper options, honestly. You also look at that pick cupboard, and it's pretty brutal, especially after the JT Miller trade, not having a first, second, or their own third in this year's draft, not having a second in 2026 or 2027. Really, I think the only thing they could give is a first-round pick next year or Seattle's own third-round pick, so I don't know how likely we're going to see a deal with the Rangers, unfortunately. Now, one team I wanted to mention as well is the Vancouver Canucks, who I don't think are quite done making deals. I could easily see them making another trade before the deadline, trying to complete that roster as much as possible. We'll see if that's trading away a player like Brock Besser, but if they are to add it to that forward group, I could see that left wing getting another addition. And you look at what Seattle could want in terms of a left wing who could easily come into a scoring role. You have Nils Höglander, who I think still has untapped potential. I don't think has been quite utilized in Vancouver correctly. He has, I think, a lot of potential, especially in a goal-scoring role, in a power play position. Seattle, I think, could pretty easily give him that, especially with how many other wingers they might be trading away this deadline. Höglander could get a pretty big opportunity, and honestly, I would like to see it because I think Höglander Vancouver is just not going to work. McCann, though, being brought back to the Canucks system would be pretty interesting to see, and I think he could easily be that first-line left wing, give some speed there to Pettersson to work with, and I think could get the best out of both players here. And for Vancouver, what we saw out of the JT Miller and Pettersson trade means that the Canucks still have their own first-round pick. So that's something they can manage and finagle in this deal alongside Höglander to make it work. I think it could be very interesting here for the Canucks if they still want to keep improving. McCann is the exact type of addition I think they could really use. Now we go into a team that is in a pretty similar spot to the Canucks where they have McCann in the system and didn't really use him all that much, and in the Leafs case, not at all. But I think could use him potentially in that system again. The big thing, though, that is kind of limiting this is already the top 6 wingers on the left side. It is quite a bit crowded. You would have a bona fide player there that maybe you could put in the first line instead of Nyes and having him on the third line, but I think there would be some player there that would be getting the short end of the stick. Still, though, that would be pretty incredible to see on that left wing and the depth we would see out of it, and I think there's a pretty natural fit there as Nick Robertson as another Nils Höglander type where he's proven scoring in the past, but hasn't had really much consistency to show for it. In Seattle, though, that could change, and again, they've gotten a lot of reclamation projects already. I mean, they could continue that. Robertson, I think, could be another addition like that. And for the Leafs as well, considering their interesting prospect pool too, there's a few options there I could see the Kraken really wanting. Now, hold your horses. I don't think they're getting Easton Cowan anytime soon, but I could see potentially Robertson, a first-round pick, maybe a defensive prospect like a Topi Niemela or a Noah Chadwick potentially going back to the Kraken, especially in Chadwick's case. They love their WHLers in Seattle. That could be another one in line. But I just had so much fun time with the situation because McCann is such an interesting player, such an underrated one, such an offensive force. And I think there's so many teams out there where he would be such a good fit for them long term. I could see a situation, though, where the Kraken trade a lot more likely guys like Brandon Tanev and Yanni Gourde at the deadline this year and wait on a McCann deal for the draft or the offseason. And that, I think, is a little bit more likely, especially considering his contract, how good it is. There's not really much of a rush for the Kraken to trade him now, but I could see it happening eventually, especially if the Kraken are trying to get definitively younger. We could see a youth wave in Seattle, which I think is pretty interesting to see. We'll see what ends up happening with the actual trade itself, but I want to hear your thoughts down below on what you guys think a mock trade for McCann could potentially look like. Where do you see him going? Do you want your team to trade for him? Let me know all your thoughts down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already, and share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all of my trade content right on one playlist, and sign up to BetUS today using code YouTube150. I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day and drink some water for me. Goodbye.